George Consuegra is going to do the introductions here because he and George are buddies, but Alberto made a combat jump, and for you paratroopers, that's pretty significant. So he's going to tell us about that. But George, come on up. Now remember, George is a Citadel graduate, so you have to listen very carefully because he doesn't talk too good.
I want to speak in Spanish.
Yeah, speak Spanish if you want to.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's been my honor and privilege to know Alberto Bolet and his beautiful wife, Margarita, for about 40 years now. And my beautiful wife, Cookie, who's here, she introduced me to them. Cookie and Margarita grew up together in Santi Espíritus, Cuba. And Margarita and her sister escaped from communist Cuba in 1961. They were dressed as nuns. My wife escaped in 1962 from communist Cuba. And when I asked Alberto, how do you want me to introduce you? He replied right away, Alberto Bolet, American citizen, father of a Marine, grandfather of a Marine captain, and also the grandfather of a naval technician, sailor, serving aboard an American nuclear submarine. But there's much, much more. He recently wrote a book, Dark Nights in the Castle of the Prince, as a legacy for his kids and grandkids. And in that book, he describes his childhood in Miami, no, not Miami, Cuba. The events leading to the Cuban Revolution, his exile in Miami, and how he was recruited by the CIA. He gives a detailed description of life in the training camps in Guatemala. Now, he was trained as a paratrooper in Brigade 2506 that invaded Cuba at the Bay of Pigs in April of 1961. And the Bay of Pigs was also known as Playa Girón. The story of the brigade's combat experience is not well known in the United States, much less their ordeal in Castro's prisons for 20 months. They were finally released in December of 1962 for food and medicine. After attending and receiving degrees from several universities, University of Miami, American University, Georgia State University, Alberto started and directed his own software and consulting business, was deputy director of IT for a major defense contractor, worked for a Big 8 consulting company, and was IT director for a major communications manufacturing company. He has been married to his wife, Margarita, for 50 plus years. He has 4 children and 9 grandchildren. Let's give a big welcome to my friend Alberto Bolet.
Thank you, George. Okay. All right. First of all, thank you for sitting here and listening to me. I know you have, your time is precious. I'm going to try to get through as quick as possible. Skip said, I'm pulling the plug in 30 minutes. Get it done. The history of Cuba is very complex. Cuba was in Columbus's first trip. He landed in the island. It was a Spanish colony until 1898. The United States declared war on Spain and actually went into Cuba and set up the Cuban government. A lot of people don't know this, but the Cuban government is a carbon copy of the United States government, the constitutional government before Castro. So, oops, there we go. In 1959,
Talking to the microphone.
yeah, my parents got my brother and I out of Cuba. The reason was that a lot of people in Cuba became very concerned when this person that's up on the screen there took over. He has been built up as a revolutionary hero. In reality, this guy was a convicted criminal. That's his mugshot there. He was accused of murder 3 times. This is while he was at the University of Havana. Not a nice person. Here's the other poster child of the Cuban Revolution. About him, I'll only say that this guy took, I need to get away from this. He took great pleasure in physically going to the place where they were executing people and firing the tiro de gracia, when you shoot the guy that's just been executed in the head. He liked to do that. All right, so these are the people that were in charge of the Cuban Armed Forces. Fidel and his brother Raul, Sergio Valle, who, the reason I got this slide up here, it's very important that you understand that some very bad decisions were made by the CIA. This guy, Sergio Valle, he created the milicias, or the sort of paramilitary units in Cuba. There were about 200,000 people that were armed and trained in this militia force. The regular army had about 50,000 people. There were 1,500 people in the brigade. So basic arithmetic tells you there is a problem here. Okay, so on our side, we had primarily Army officers in the Cuban Army that were not involved in any of the repression with the Batista regime. The CIA, who was given the task by President Eisenhower of putting a plan together to invade Cuba. It was a plan that was taken from the Normandy invasion. So it looked very much like that. It was amphibious assaults, it was airstrikes, it was drops by paratroopers, guilty, and it involved airstrikes and the destruction of the Cuban Air Force. See what happened. There was an underground in Cuba. My wife's brother was a member of that underground. He was fighting in a mountain range in the central part of Cuba called El Escambray. There were, nobody really knows how many people were in those rebel units. Fidel Castro asked the Soviet Union for help. They sent a Spetsnaz unit. Do you guys know what that is? That's a Russian Special Forces unit. There were about 50,000 of them, and they came in, and what they would do would be to encircle an area of land, burn it down, burn all the crops down, shoot everybody that was there, move on to the next block. The brigade had an infiltration force that would go and try to help these people that were fighting Castro. Most of those were captured and executed. Okay, so there's the first invasion plan of the Eisenhower administration, landings in 3 parts of Cuba. President Kennedy modified the plan, 1 main landing area in the southern part and another one in the northeastern part. You get the picture. I'm going to talk a little bit about the training camps. As an 18-year-old, I was in the University of Miami. I was an Air Force ROTC cadet. I had just passed my flight physical. I was fat, dumb, and happy. My brother, who was a very interesting person, still is, walked into the house one day and he said, "Hey, the CIA is recruiting people to go and fight Castro." I said, "What are you talking about?" He's a high school kid. And he said, "Yeah, I'm going." So I went because I'm the older brother and I have always taken care of him. So of course I wanted to go and fight Castro, but the principal motivation it was to take care of my brother, make sure he didn't get his head blown off. Thank God he didn't. So we go to Guatemala, and we are in these training camps that the CIA had set up in farms that were owned by Guatemala's ambassador to the United Nations. And when we stepped off the plane, I did one of the stupid things that I have done throughout my life. I volunteered for something. So they say, "We need volunteers for the paratrooper battalion." I said, "Oh, I'll go." It's close to flying, right?
Well, for a while.
Yeah, for a while you're up there. So there's a picture of some of the people in the 1st Airborne Battalion, those cute little Australian hats. We didn't take those. So we trained essentially jumping into these cow pastures and using T10 parachutes, T2 reserve chutes, jumping out of C-46, Curtiss C-46 aircraft. I did that about 6 times. I learned to do PLFs. I can still remember the drill: stand up, hook your static line, check your equipment, stick one to the door, go. So, is that correct? I see somebody nodding.
Close enough.
Nodding their head there. I loved it. I really loved it. This is one of the most wonderful periods in my life, with the exception of when I married the cute blonde over there. We had very, very good training. I learned this month, some guy call me. I'm writing a book about these smoke jumpers. It said, smoke jumpers. Said, yep. The CIA recruited these people in Montana that used to jump into forest fires, and they were the ones that packed your parachutes. So I said, wow, didn't know that. There's somebody jumping out of one of the airplanes. The helmet, that's a football helmet, Rydell, okay, from some high school. I thought that was unprofessional, but what the hell, it worked. The brigade had different pieces. There was infantry people, infantry battalion. We had some heavy weapons. There's guys shooting a 75 millimeter recoilless there. We had 4.2 inch mortar was the heaviest mortar that we had, but we had 4.2, 81, and 60 millimeter. We also had a UDT. There's an interesting story here. I knew these guys. They went to school with me. And the CIA gave them a photograph taken from a U-2 plane, and they said, there's no reefs there. Guess what? There were reefs. So, let's see. We also had tanks, and the tank people went to Fort Knox to be trained on M41 tanks. Castro had very good intelligence. This is a letter from the Castro Intelligence Service that details the troop strength, where they're being trained, what's the sort of timeline involved here, where they are in the training. How do they know all that? The media didn't help. Yeah, what a shock, huh? New York Times published an article April 7th, 61, saying, woo, there's training camps in Guatemala, there's, they're coming. Okay, we had an Air Force. It was pretty darn good, actually. They had 17, I really get confused. The Air Force calls airplanes B or A, and it's exactly the same airplane. They just painted something or replaced the cowling or something. So we have 17 of those. They were donated by the Alabama Air National Guard, who not only donated the aircraft, but donated the mechanics and some pilots, you know, to train our guys. It's a pretty neat aircraft, but then I'm going to show you what Castro had. We had a transport wing, the C-46s that we used, and C-54s. So we had a bunch of those. Now here's what our opponents had. A Hawker Sea Fury. I don't know if you're familiar with this aircraft. It's a fighter airplane from the British Air Force. It came into service about 1947. It's pretty good. It was much faster than anything that we had, better armed. I got shot at by one of these. It's pretty scary. They had T-33s, but these T-33s were armed. So they had rockets and they had 20 millimeter cannons on these T-33s. It's a Lockheed plane, much faster than a B-26. And they had B-26s also, they had a bunch of those. Okay, so here is the planned assault on Playa Girón. You know, the press refers to this as the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Bay of Pigs is pretty big. It's all of that area there from the top left to the bottom right over here. And the invasion actually happened in two places. One was called Playa Girón Beach, and the other one, Playa Larga, or Long Beach. The paratroopers, is there a pointer here, Skip?
Yeah, if you press this little thing right here,
Yeah.
that'll give you a laser pointer.
Great. See, that works. Okay, so there were airdrops here to cut this road to the sugarcane mill, Central Australia. This is where I jumped. This is a little town called San Blas, and actually not very big of a town. And then we had another portion of the battalion jump over here, and then we had a third element that cut this road off. There are only three ways that you could get into the beaches. And our mission was to cut those roads, which we did. There's people landing in Red Beach, Playa Larga. There's B-26Bs or A-26, whichever way you want to call them. And Castro had majority of his anti-aircraft were these 4-barrel guns, and they were pretty effective. They did shoot some planes down. The problem was that our wonderful president and the people that were pushing bureaus in Langley decided that 16 aircraft attacking at one time the first airstrike was too much. That was just over the top. So we got to cut that down. And instead of sending 16 aircraft, they sent 8. And some of those were shot down. They didn't get all of the Castro planes. Well, Castro had some pretty damn good pilots. One thing that many people do not know is that there were foreign pilots flying for Castro. So the Soviets had spoken to their communist friends in other places, and there were Chilean pilots flying. There were pilots from other countries flying for the Cuban Air Force. So as a result, see this box at the bottom here? These are air crews that got shot down. And we had 7 aircraft out of the original 16 shut down. And the pilots kept flying back. They knew that they were going to get smoked, but they kept flying back. 4 Americans, the first 4 here, those were B-26, the trainers, B-26 pilots from Alabama Air National Guard flew in Girón and got killed. One of them, his body was preserved in a freezer for 17 or 18 years until his daughter finally talked the State Department into getting Castro to release the body of her father. Here's something else that really gets my goat, okay? I was there getting shot at, strafed. There was a lot of artillery. There was a Navy task force right outside the territorial water limit 12-mile limit. The Essex had a Navy Sky Raiders squadron on it. It's called the Blue Blasters, okay? The Boxer had 2,000 Marines sitting in there. Why? Because Admiral Arleigh Burke, who was an outstanding person, if he's passed away, I hope he's in heaven somewhere, knew that Kennedy was going to wobble, and he wanted to have that force there that could intervene and turn the tide. If he only would have allowed, if Kennedy would only have allowed those airplanes to fly combat, we wouldn't have lost. I don't know who would have lost or not, but our odds would have been a lot better than they were. There's some picture of T-34 tanks attacking us. In the sector where I was at, I got a look at the highway, and there was a line of tanks coming at us, and I told my brother, we're not going to make it. And fortunately, our Air Force was pretty good. They were able to hold those people back. Okay, afterwards, well, there's, well, first I have to tell you this. Wednesday, April 19, maybe 3 o'clock, I'm standing in Playa Hidalgo in the beach itself, and I don't have any bullets, okay? A BAR is not a very good weapon if you don't have bullets. So we had nothing. And we got an order from the brigade commander saying, go into the swamp and try to link up with the people that were in the Escambray. So we did that. So I was in the swamps of the Ciénaga Zapata from 19 April to 1st May. I didn't get captured. I walked into a medical unit of the rebel army, and I was completely dehydrated. I hadn't eaten all that time. I ate a snake. That snake tasted real good. So what happened after the Bay of Pigs? The Bay of Pigs would just be an incident in history, but there were some serious consequences for the United States. The first one we all know about is the missile crisis in '62. By the way, the United States did not win the the standoff with the Russians, and I'll tell you why. The Russians had a nuclear subbase in southern Cuba, and there were always nuclear subs in that base, getting food, getting water, and those subs had boomers in them. So the land missiles got taken out, but not all of them. The Cuban economy collapsed under communism. Very few people know this, but the Cuban military has physically fought in Africa throughout the years, in the Congo, in Eritrea, in Yemen, in South Africa, in Angola, in Libya, and Somalia. And Cuban pilots trained pilots from some of these countries in flying MiG-21s. The Cuban pilots were real good. Cuba has spread communism throughout Latin America. In Ecuador, Rafael Ortega, President Rafael Ortega, he's still there. That's Raúl Castro there with him. In Angola, Africa, José dos Santos was a personal friend of Fidel. Dilma Rousseff, if you haven't heard, this woman used to be a communist guerrilla. She was president of Brazil, real good friend of Fidel. In Colombia, the Castro regime has destabilized that country for years. I have a letter from the head of the FARC guerrillas to Fidel Castro thanking him for his support and pledging his absolute loyalty. There's Fidel with Daniel Ortega from Nicaragua. That guy was trained in Cuba with his brother. He was set up to go into Nicaragua. We all remember during the Reagan administration, the Contras and all that. That's the guy that was responsible. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez graduated from the Military Academy of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia. Okay? He was good to go. Well, he went to Cuba, and they did the same thing to him that they did to Ortega. And he turned out to be the guy that brought communism into Venezuela. They're still paying for it. Cristina Kirchner in Argentina was a very good friend of the Castros. She was not a communist, but she was close. In Bolivia, Evo Morales, who was like the Native Bolivian candidate for president, was a confirmed socialist. Very good friend of Fidel. Why does this matter? Let me go back to this slide for a second, okay? Latin America has a population of 626 million people. This is 2015. It's bigger than that now. The merchandise exports of the United States in 2005, 48% to Latin America, 23% to Europe, 13% to Asia, 1% to the Middle East. Where are we sending American troops? To countries that really don't care. And Latin America, crickets. Okay? There's the amount of money that the World Bank has paid to Latin countries. I want to close with these two. Winston Churchill is one of my favorite persons. Socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery. That's what socialism is. That's what some people in our country want to burden us with. Okay? So read that quote. That guy, very, very smart. Ronald Reagan, my favorite president in the 20th century. Socialism only works in two places: heaven, when they don't need it, and hell, where they already have it. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me.
So, folks, we've got some time for questions. If anybody, excuse me, Albert.
Sure, go ahead, Skip.
So if anybody has questions.
I'll be happy to. There's one over there.
Thanks, Skip. Interesting, and we all thank you very much. A lot of history that we thought we might have, at least I thought I might have known, and I didn't. But a tactical question.
Sure.
On your jump, did you jump at night, and then from what altitude, and did you have a reserve? The combat jump.
I can tell you, yes, I did have a T2 reserve chute. The airplane starts... Up behind the mic, please. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so a C-46 has a tail, so the aircraft has to be in a very shallow dive. We jumped at probably 5:30 a.m. It was dawn. I remember standing at the door. It was a beautiful day. The aircraft starts dropping people at 1,200 feet. You jump out, the tail flies over you. The last guy jumps out at 800 feet. You get approximately 4 seconds hang time. It works. Sorry?
Were you wearing a reserve chute?
T2, yes. Yes.
Even though at that altitude?
Didn't have to use it. I have my smoke jumpers looking out for me. Yes, sir.
Where did the planes take off from?
I'm sorry?
Where did the planes take off from?
Okay, that's a very good question. The brains in the CIA, our air base that was used by the Air Force to launch the invasion was in a place called Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua. So if you look at Nicaragua, it's approximately 1,000 clicks from Puerto Cabezas to Playa Girón. These planes had a net loiter time over the target of between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on, where they had headwinds or, It was ridiculous, but that's what they did. Yes.
By the way, folks, I have read this book, and it's an excellent book.
Thank you.
Roberto, thank you for the history lesson today. I have one question. You were in prison. Was your brother in prison with you?
My brother was in prison with me. We were there 20 months that's the name of the book, is The Castle of the Prince, Castillo del Príncipe. It was a fortification actually built by the Spanish in the 1700s. And we were at the beginning at the top, but then we went down into the dungeons. So physically we were in the dungeons of this place.
Okay.
It had a moat around it.
Gotcha. All right.
It also had a lot of guards with machine guns that didn't like you.
Who arranged for your release from prison?
Very good question. The Kennedy administration, Robert Kennedy was actually the point man, and he cooked a deal with Fidel. And there was a very famous lawyer that went to Cuba to do the negotiating. His name is Robert Donovan. He's the guy that was involved in getting Gary Powers out of Russia. So the deal was the United States would provide $62 million in medicine and foodstuff. And because Kennedy did not want the government to do that, he gave the pharmaceutical companies and the food companies a tax write-off. They could write it off right off the top. So not, it's a tax break. The $62 million were taken to Cuba in American cargo ships. They were offloaded and immediately unloaded into Russian ships, and Castro used that money to pay off his military debt. Cuban people never saw an aspirin. Yes, sir.
Getting your exercise, right? Yeah. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I've flown into Guantanamo, which is amazing we still control that. But
yes.
I'm curious, I think I gather that the Achilles heel to the operation was lack of air support. And then, but going further, say that, those 3 routes that came down, and you were supposed to block those, and then an inbound force, the second wave, was there a second wave, third wave? Were there supplies coming in, or did they just figure out at some point just cut off the whole thing and you guys are on your own?
That's an excellent question. And the answer to that is that in the original plan of what I call the desk jockeys at Langley, they felt that we could take this area and hold it for about 10 days. And one of the reasons that the Playa Girón was chosen was that it had an airfield in there. Of course, the airfield was useless because Castro had complete air superiority. He shut down, as you saw, half of planes that we sent there. And the idea then was that there would be an uprising in Cuba because there was a very active underground. Well, the desk jockeys didn't understand the way Cuban military and intelligence service worked. The very day that the first airstrike occurred, the Castro secret police went out and arrested anyone that they thought could possibly be a counter-revolutionary. And they put them in movies, they put them in ballparks, they put them anywhere where they could hold people, and then they started executing the ones that they knew were counter-revolutionaries. So the underground mysteriously vanished on 15 April. The invasion was 17 April. Does that answer your question?
I have 2 thank yous and 1 question.
Sir?
First thank you is for being here today and just educating us.
It's an honor.
My second thank you is for my family. My oldest daughter is married to Mario Cristobal, the head coach at University of Miami. Mario's father, Mario Sr., was in prison under Castro for 2 years as a resistance fighter.
Yeah.
The Cristobal family and the White family thank you for what you and your men did those years ago. My question is, I had the honor of serving in the 7th Special Forces Group between Vietnam tours, and some of the great men that I served with were very proud of the fact that they helped train the men that killed eventually Che Guevara.
Yes.
My question is this: in your training, did you see or know of any Green Berets from 7th Special Forces Group that helped train your men?
Very good question.
Thank you.
I have to sort of describe the way the CIA worked. In the camps, the American advisors were not allowed to speak to us. Most of the Cubans in the camps spoke English. I spoke perfect English. We were not allowed to talk to them. We would talk to them in moments where they were there, and then I would ask a question or something like that. But the rule was that they could not talk to us. So there was they used aliases. So, the guy would say, "Oh, my name is Jim." Well, I knew his name wasn't Jim, I knew that some of them had been in Vietnam, and I had not heard of Vietnam. I said, "What the hell were you doing there?"
We have all asked ourselves that same question at one time or another.
So it was very difficult for us to know for certain, what unit they were in. I know one guy was in the 101st Airborne, and that person was an older person, and he had jumped in Normandy. He told me that. So he was not supposed to do that.
Any more questions?
Miss Sue.
Alberto, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got two young ladies at my table here, Cookie and Margarita. If any of you want to know what it's like to live under communism and socialism, you come see them. They lived it. Then the other point I want to make is, Alberto, I've told you this many times, but I was a junior in high school in Miami, Florida.
Yep.
Everybody knew where the training camps were. The whole world knew. Also, the New York Times published the battle plan. And even as a junior in high school, when I read the Miami Herald on a daily basis, and these young brave 1,500 men that you have in your Brigade 2506, day after day, and even at that early age, I know the United States is going to come in and help them and everything else, and there was no help. I'll never forget that. And now what can I say? Just want to make that point. Thank you, Alberto.
Skip. We had Sue.
Okay, we got time for one more.
Just really quickly, it's not really a question, and I don't need the mic, I'm good. Just so you know, Alberto did an outstanding interview for the Veterans History Project with a lot more detail about this. His book is fabulous. I will be getting that interview online. He also donated some interesting images and artifacts about his experience, and I'm working on getting those beautiful women in the studio because I would like to get their stories as well. So, gracias.
Thank you, Sue.
So before we do the applause, and we will do an applause, we don't pay very well, but we do provide a copy of our book. A lot of the people in this room's stories are in this book, including mine, and for speaking strictly for me, if you're having trouble sleeping, you read my stories and you'll sleep like a champ. And we also have our challenge coin.
Thank you
So
very much.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good job.
It is an honor for me